Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third in our series of webinars organized by Hong Kong U in relation to the pandemic crisis that we currently have and legal challenges and issues. So my name is Brian Tang, and I'm the founding executive director of LITE Lab at Hong Kong U. So I look forward to sharing with you, but I also look forward to your questions and your engagement here. So a couple of things. So first and foremost, I will be giving a presentation and that'll be followed by a Q&A session. So if you haven't used Zoom much in the past, there is a Q&A button at the bottom, and please pose any questions you may have there so that I can look at those at the end and respond to them accordingly. So that's number one. Number two, I am also, as you all would know, we are now in the midst of having to provide online teaching for myself, actually, since the end of last semester when the protests were in existence in Hong Kong. So I'm going to introduce some of those elements into this webinar. So it'll be a little bit different from in the past. So I'm encouraging your participation, please. So just to make sure that you're not falling asleep during the lunchtime period. So perhaps with that and without any further ado, let me start. I just want to check that you can see my screen there. Let's see. So the topic of my presentation today is COVID-19 a trigger for mindset, policy, and infrastructure changes regarding AI, legal tech, or Lawtech, and Regtech. So a little bit about me first. As mentioned earlier on, I'm the founding executive director of the LITE Lab at Hong Kong U, which is a new program and which is interdisciplinary and experiential. My background is as a private practitioner in Australia, in New York, and then in-house here in Hong Kong. And in full declaration of interest, some of my other roles include being the co-chair of the Regtech committee of the FinTech Association, as well as being on the steering committee of LITE, which is the Asia Pacific Legal Innovation and Technology Association. So I want to declare that interest so that you knew that I intrinsically had a vested interest in wanting to share and grow both of those spaces. And I also wanted to add a couple of caveats to this presentation. We are in the eye of the storm right now. The COVID-19 situation is fast moving and an evolving situation. Crises give rise to divergent behavioral reactions, and that's what we've seen over the past few months and will continue to see. And COVID-19 really highlights the need for an interdisciplinary approach involving science, economics, psychology, technology, and of course the law. This presentation will be a mixture of normative, what want, i.e. I have declared some of my interests, but also what actually is happening. And as a warning, this presentation may pose more questions than answers. Now, to set the scene a little bit, these are three areas of existing areas of research and practice that I have been engaged in. The first is in Lawtech, so that can be briefly described as digitization of paper for analysis and portability, creating some sort of Google of law where lawyers, companies, and individuals can access law readily for access to justice, but also of cost and efficiency, but also online dispute resolution. The Association for Corporate Counsel recently published a report, and it was described in-house innovation as still glacial as expected. So this report was published during the COVID pandemic, but really reflects a prior period, and the hope and intent was, will this attitude change? In the area of Regtech is often seen as promoting financial inclusion through digital identity and fintech, and combating financial crime as one of its key components. In the area of AI, I'm very involved in the area of AI governance, as well as data protection and privacy in relation to that, and also the impact that AI has in relation to the labor markets. So here's the interactive aspect. Now, if you haven't used this before, if you can indulge me and use your phones or your computers and input the top there, paulev.com/BrianTang360. And this is the first in a series of a couple of questions that I've posed to you. So this is the little primer here so that you to get used to the system. So the initial question is this: how confident are you regarding COVID-19 being cleared where you live? And I put it that way because while I understand majority of the attendees on this webinar live in Hong Kong, some do not. So are you confident that it will be cleared where you live by the end of summer? That's summer in the Northern Hemisphere. So if you could go into the system and go into that website, paulev.com/Brian Tang 360, and there you'll see the first question. I'd love, please do engage. We are fortunate to have, I think, let's see, more than 90 participants. We're at 107 participants right now live. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and views in relation to how confident you are that COVID will be cleared where you live by the end of summer in the Northern Hemisphere. I mentioned Northern Hemisphere because I'll get to this, but I'm actually in the Southern Hemisphere right now. So it's getting colder here. So great to hear that as of now, quite a large majority of you are quite confident, which is great. And I suspect that a lot of you are based in Hong Kong, and the measures in Hong Kong are progressing very well, including the opening of the government and courts this week. And in fact, Hong Kong U has opened up as well in terms of the admin staff and the like. So it sounds like we have a relatively confident group here that's responding. Fantastic. I'll stop the poll in 3, 2, 1. Super. So again, just wanted to get you used to the system and get your initial feedback in relation to your views on COVID and its development. Now, through COVID, we've seen these startling images from around the world, whether it is horrendous deaths and isolation, to the ways in which we are all working and living on a day-to-day basis. This is Times Square, which is completely deserted. These are factory floors, which are, again, completely deserted and not functioning. Restaurants are being closed around the world. Retail shops are being closed around the world. And offices are being shuttered, and we're all learning to live and work from home. And also we are all being kept onto our particular jurisdictions because there are very, very limited flights in the air. More closely in relation to the law, the courts are shut. So here's a chart that comes from the US looking at unemployment claims, and just shows how startling those numbers are. And the quotation given from the White House's economic advisor was the unemployment rate now is literally the same levels as the Great Depression. One way to think about what is happening right now is the way that there's a shifting relationship dynamics due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is kind of a framework that I've been developing to think about how the areas I had mentioned and others will be evolving. So firstly, person to person. As you know, because of the nature of the infectious disease, there's less person-to-person contact, so that impacts the services industry, the goods industry, for example, in terms of manufacturing. It's impacting employer to employee, as we're now all working increasingly from home, or both home and the workplace, and how would that evolve? It's impacting the relationship between the state and the citizen, as the state is trying to navigate the public good, which to manage the pandemic, while citizens are, of course, are concerned about the individual privacy and other concerns. If you live in countries that are more that are federations, you have provincial to provincial government relationships being impacted. I'm actually currently in Perth, Western Australia, and the borders are currently shut between Western Australia and some of the other states. And then, the relationship between provincial governments and the national government as well, in terms of what can be done and directed for public good. Moving further down, we have nation to nation. As you've seen, the planes are now not flying. So how will the nation to nation relationship arise and evolve? And then comes the international body to nation kind of relationship. You've seen some of the role that WHO has played and some of the criticism it's faced as well. How will that evolve going forward as we approach the great reopening? So these are the three areas of inquiry that I'll be covering today. The first area is COVID-19 as a driver of Lawtech and Regtech adoption. The second area is COVID-19 as driver of Regtech discourse on surveillance and privacy. And the third area is on COVID-19 as driver of AI governance discourse on modeling and universal basic income. So there is a method to the madness in terms of it links to, as I said, the three areas of research I have, and I'm trying to extract from what is happening now in terms of the different areas of research I'm engaging in. So first and foremost, COVID-19 as driver of Lawtech and Regtech adoption. So I'll firstly cover some of the basic elements of Lawtech and Regtech, examine some of the market forces in light of COVID-19, and then some of the policy interventions in light of those developments. So Lawtech, again, as a brief recap, talks about digitization and automation. So if you, and the users of Lawtech are varied. You could be at a law firm or chambers, you could be corporate counsel, you could be a company which doesn't have corporate counsel, an SME, you could be a citizen looking for access to justice, or you could be the government itself trying to deal with, and the courts in terms of how technologies can affect the delivery of legal services. So that includes the lawyers looks at lots of documents and paper, so document review through discovery, e-discovery as it's called, and contract review. Simple answers through chatbots and questions can be answered potentially, through technology, and document management and production is simplified with digitization and the like. Lawtech also talks about access and insights. So law, regulation, judicial determinations, they are all public documents that should be readily available and searchable. So Lawtech assists with that, and furthermore with AI and big data, analytics and insights can be gleaned there. And last but not least, Lawtech talks about how we can provide digital or remote services. So Richard Susskind is a well-known legal futurist who published late last year his latest book called Online Courts and the Future of Justice. And he posed the question, is the court a place or service? Regtech, I've called the secret sauce. So within Regtech, I call it secret sauce because it serves not just the financial institutions, but fintechs, as well as what's known as virtual asset service providers, namely those that work in the crypto space. And they cover a broad variety of financial services. And in some contexts, Regtech is also described to cover SupTech, which is what supervisors use, as well as GovTech, which is what governments use to pass regulation. So on the right-hand side, these are some of the functions that Regtech within the finance industry is used, but there is a broad definition of Regtech too, which is technology to address any regulatory compliance. So whether it's environmental compliance, and there are lots of many different other facets as well of any across the gambit of services from governments. So here's another very brief survey I wanted to engage with you all. So how would you describe yourself? So this will allow me to better understand who you are as the audience. Are you a user of Lawtech? Are you a user of Regtech? Are you a producer of Lawtech or producer of Regtech, or maybe you're neither? Again, would love to have a better feel and understanding of who the audience is so that perhaps I can calibrate accordingly. I personally, given my interests, do cover both Lawtech and Regtech, so we have different audiences that may have different interests. And by the way, as you found, I've used the word Lawtech rather than legal tech, which is often used, because legal tech sometimes is used to describe how technology can help law firms, whereas to me, Lawtech can apply in a much broader gambit. Okay, great. So we have a broad variety of folk who are really more on the on the neither side, which is important too, because we want to, a lot of these issues are policy issues, and we want to ensure that those who are not directly involved in the space have a better understanding of some of these issues. Super. So sounds like that, looks like more than half are in the neither category. Now, moving right along, what impact would you expect COVID-19 to have on the adoption of Lawtech? So a lot of you are not in the space. So on the face of it, the narrative is actually traditionally quite good. The narrative is really about if we are not having face-to-face, if everything, we are all distanced, would we not have more access and appeal to use Lawtech going forward? Wow, 50-50. We'll see that adjust a little bit. Well, maybe shifting a little bit, yes, a lot. So the expectation is there'll be a lot of adoption for Lawtech. Super. So between yes and yes a lot, which is fantastic. So what about, oopsie, I'm trying to click. Okay, so what about the next slide, which I'm having difficulties with? Okay, that's up. There's a joke about giving presentations for regarding technology. There's always a glitch when you do it. Here we go. Now, instead of what Lawtech, the question is in relation to Regtech. What impact would you expect COVID-19 to have on the adoption of Regtech? So in this case, again, you can use Regtech in the narrower or broader sense, in terms of whether it just applies to financial industry or beyond the financial industry as well. So again, quite a positive note here in terms of either yes a lot or yes in terms of changes where COVID-19 and Regtech adoption is concerned. So, what are the market forces in relation to COVID-19 impacting Lawtech? So the courts and tribunals have been closed, right? So one comment that has been made is, well, what will half the lawyers of the world do, right, if the courts are shut? But what else has happened? So client businesses had an existential crisis. There's social distancing or lockdowns, and they're called slightly different things in different jurisdictions. Factories are closed, travel bans are in place, and working from home is now the new norm. This has been a popular meme around the digital transformation circles. It asks who led the digital transformation in your company, the CEO, CTO, or COVID-19. So it's optimistic, shall we say, that COVID-19 will lead some of these changes. And on its face, that certainly has happened. So there's been an explosion of use of video conferencing platforms. So Zoom in December had 10 million users. In March, it had 200, and in April, 300 million users. This is notwithstanding the cybersecurity issues. Research is being done more from home and the like, and from remotely away from the office. But interestingly, at least in my mind, while there's a lot of news about telehealth, right? How can people visit the doctors without being exposed to other patients who potentially have symptoms? Why is there not enough talk about tele-law, i.e. using more law remotely? But what has really happened in Lawtech? And to be honest, this surprised me when I first dug further into this, although on reflection, it did make sense. The law firm business model is such that it's really cash flow dependent. And there's a quotation here that with the exception of the top 50 firms, most firms have 2 to 3 months tops of cash reserves. So with the loss of billable hours, there's been news regarding pay suspensions or cuts or furloughs or dismissals. Cash conservation has been a high priority for law firms, and so they have less money to invest in tech investment. So some of the more prominent initiatives have actually been put on hold for a little bit. On the flip side, legal tech startups also face cash runway issues. This means that they need clients as well, and if the clients are law firms and law firms are not buying, then the Lawtechs are in trouble as well. Now, in the Regtech space, literally in the last few days, FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force in relation to anti-money laundering and counter financing of terrorism, has issued a new report in relation to the challenges that have given rise due to COVID-19. So bad guys learn new ways to take advantage of things, and so that's something that FATF has cautioned that more vigilance should be in place. And in the Regtech space, it seems like it's kind of a tale of two cities. In the B2B space, anecdotally, there's been reports of banks really moving faster in relation to determining Regtech as a priority. They've also been, because bad guys and their pressures for misbehavior has risen because of volatility and chasing P&L, more trade surveillance is being sought as well. But on the B2C side, again, while the narrative seems to be, hey, if we're not using cash and credit cards might also be contaminant risks, so we're all going to go digital or contactless. Retail adoption of the new brands of fintechs that are addressing customers has not been as grown as much. Those fintechs that have more established brands have, some of them in Hong Kong have done quite well actually during this period, but others have had issues. And recently, RBS has shuttered its Bo initiative as well, citing COVID as one of the reasons. So what have the regulators done in this case? So FATF on April 1st actually issued some of the strongest encouragements one could really have in this space, saying that the use of technology, including fintech, regtech, and subtech, should be used to the fullest extent possible. Similarly, HKMA has issued guidance to authorize institutions and stored value facilities in relation to increased vigilance regarding account opening and continued access. Understanding during this time, there will be people who will be transacting more online. So again, a greater reliance on Regtech. And this builds upon the HKMA's AML CFT Regtech Forum, which was just held at the end of last year. On the Lawtech side, there have been quite a few developments, and in Hong Kong, quite a few very interesting developments. So the judiciary has given guidance in relation to telephone and video hearings, so there's more and more of that happening. But the Department of Justice has also announced two new Lawtech initiatives. The first is the Lawtech Fund for SME law firms, where if you are a firm or a chamber with 5 or less practicing lawyers, you could apply for up to $50,000 to upgrade your IT system and to engage in Lawtech training. So this really allows more inclusion of 60% of the law firms and 50% of the chambers that comprise the Hong Kong legal fraternity. Department of Justice also announced a COVID-19 online dispute resolution scheme for SMEs. So engage the new online dispute resolution platform, eBram, to provide ODR services to the general public and businesses involved in COVID-19 related disputes that are capped at 50,000 Hong Kong dollars. That's 500,000, my apologies. And the expected launch is targeted at June. So these are some really interesting initiatives that the Department of Justice has introduced. Globally, there have been quite a few even more provocative initiatives. One in line with what Hong Kong has done is more of the courts around the world are now opening themselves up to phone and video hearings, or in other nomenclature, online dispute resolution. So there's a website called Remote Courts, which is run by Richard Susskind, and I think just recently he published like up to 40 jurisdictions which are all engaged in increased ODR at the court level. More interestingly, Utah in the United States have recently published a consultation paper in relation to regulatory reform for the profession, seeking things that are now in existence in the United Kingdom and New South Wales in Australia, where non-lawyers could have ownership of law firms and fees could be shared with non-lawyers. And Supreme Court Judge Jimenez has explained that the pandemic has highlighted the need for regulatory reform. So one question that does arise for future research and policy consideration is what might be the most effective forms of policy intervention to promote Lawtech in this space. Would it be the courts? Would it be the Department of Justice? Would it be the law societies and bar associations, or perhaps a combination of all of them? Now, turning to the second topic, so moving from drivers of Lawtech and Regtech adoption, we now look at Regtech discourse on surveillance and privacy. Now, again, Regtech, as I described, is a secret source, not just for cost savings and back office cost savings and efficiencies, but for top line generation, because it covers KYC, which is onboarding of new clients to assist with the generation of revenue. But this is an area that law enforcement is particularly interested in as well, because it's used to combat crime, as you have seen, such that FATF has also been a proponent of exploring digital identity initiatives, but of course within the context of increasing surveillance and privacy and data protection considerations cross-border. Now, but as I mentioned, Regtech, defined more broadly, can cover GovTech, maybe even health tech in our current context. So as of May 5th, more than 3.5 million people have been infected and more than 250,000 deaths have occurred worldwide. One of the new developments that have been proposed that can help combat this further growth of this horrible pandemic is contact tracing, which will allow the smartphones that we all have to assist the public health authorities to track those that have been exposed and contain those and treat those accordingly. So in the private use case, there's been some discussion in the last few years already regarding the access of apps to and companies to our apps, to our cameras, to our microphones, to GPS, to our contact lists, such that it's been provocatively called surveillance capitalism, the way that we've chosen for convenience purposes to sign up for a lot of these apps. But now in the context of public health and public health authorities, they need to test, they need to trace, they need to track symptoms. Might there be more ways that and justifications for more of these sensors and technologies to be tapped in by public health authorities locally and around the world to contain this horrible pandemic for the public good? So here's a table that I've put together over the past couple of weeks, and this is fast changing, so probably after today I'll have to modify it again. But this gives a quick overview in terms of some of these contact tracing apps that have developed, and its relevance you will see in our current context a little bit shortly. So there are 30 or more, and I think that number is much more these days, apps that are in current development or released. They really started in China, which is where the pandemic had originated. And contrary to a lot of reports, it really is a city initiative. There is an initiative for national health code, but really has arisen around the different cities, starting around February 8th. It's more self-reporting and centralized, and very importantly, for an adoption point of view, they use payment apps, which are really prevalent in China. So QR codes are generated by like Alipay and WeChat, and everybody needs Alipay or WeChat if they want to transact in China. And the three colors will tell them whether they are allowed to leave any particular area. So while there are no statistics that I have seen, the assumption is that the download rate is very high because everybody has payment apps. Singapore was issued one of the first contact tracing apps as well. They've now made it open source, and it's a hybrid model. They call it a Bluetooth digital handshake. So with these contact apps, the idea is tracing apps. The idea is that for privacy purposes, you don't see your phone contacts the other phones in your vicinity and exchanges hashed details of the identity of the phones, if you like, and as and when and if one of the parties has contacted COVID-19, the Ministry of Health can then outreach to people based on who those phones have been in touch with, shall we say. So that approach kind of was mirrored in Australia and various other jurisdictions as well. Australia calls its program COVID Safe. In Australia, there's also been a privacy impact assessment, and there's been a lot of encouragement of adoption, as in Singapore and elsewhere around the world. So the adoption level in Singapore is quite impressive at 20%, but it's more than 1 million. Australia had hit more than 4.6 million, but then that's 18%. Now, separately, what has made some big news is Google. So Google and Apple have introduced a new, they're pains to say it is not an app, it's actually an API for exposure notification. So it is not an app, it is not contact tracing. It allows for different public health authorities to create their own apps on the back of that notification, whereby the phrase is that the Bluetooth then whispers both to iOS and Android devices across the board. And then it's the job of the public health authorities to determine the extent and manner of contact tracing. You have private initiatives like MIT. They have created a platform called Safe Paths, and it was just they had just mentioned recently that they are working with 37 jurisdictions in the US and 47 worldwide, but they're very much privacy focused, and they're decentralized as well. They're using GPS. And so it'll be interesting because Apple does not use GPS and may not allow GPS for privacy purposes. And so it'll be interesting the way forward. But even to complicate things even further, in Europe, there are various jurisdictions that were looking at centralized platforms. So while they're working using pan-European privacy preserving proximity tracing standards, so there are quite a few protocols arising. They're using a more centralized rather than decentralized platform to track. So what is that? How does this all intersect? So with these, there are technology trade-offs. So if one uses Bluetooth, it drains the power more. Other Bluetooth devices can interfere with each other. You may need it on screen for some of the apps, and you need to upload your findings onto a centralized server. With Bluetooth, it's not as accurate in terms of proximity. It reveals your location, and do you want that to be revealed? And if you don't want it to be revealed, you need an actual public health authority to actually redact it. So when you think about cybersecurity and privacy design, are the platforms opening their source code? Are there software bugs? As I had mentioned, there are quite a few competing technology standards, whereby the pan-European one is followed by some large jurisdictions, but there is another standard called DP3T that are being followed by some other standards, and that's more decentralized as opposed to the more centralized European standards. And then there are privacy protections that people are concerned about, including who will get access to the data and the potential resulting mission creep. So, and then last but not least, digital divide, because not everybody has a smartphone. So Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison has targeted 40% for adoption, and he says that this is what is needed for this to work. But right now, Australia only has 18%. Recently, Washington Post, University of Maryland conducted a national US poll, and they found that only 18% of Americans, 18% of Americans do not own a smartphone, so therefore they will not be captured by these programs. And 50% or more said they may or will not use the Apple Google app. It was called an app, although there was some confusion there, but long and the short of it, there was distrust. So some questions that arise. Right now, most jurisdictions from the prior page, as you've seen, really focus on voluntary. All of these are all voluntary regimes. So you have to convince the citizens to sign up. But what if they feel that for public health purposes you need them to sign up, and therefore they make it mandatory? So in India, India's Arogya Setu app has 90 million downloads, and that's because they made it mandatory for employers to have their employees sign up for it, right? So could this be a direction going forward? What with more of us working from home, will there be more employer surveillance of the home worker? With identity, digital identity systems fighting COVID-19, if issues of money laundering and terrorism arise, unfortunately, will governments cite national security to impose some of these mandatory systems? And then last but not least, cross-border trust is so important. So even if a country develops a system which is really, they feel secure, if another country doesn't trust that system, they won't allow the airlines to fly. So that's that. So that's in relation to Regtech and surveillance and privacy. Now, in terms of the third topic, I want to cover briefly the area of COVID-19 as a driver of AI governance discourse in modeling and in universal basic income. So here are three models that I saw recently about the potential futures of COVID-19. One is that there would be recurring small outbreaks in the coming years. Two is that be a monster wave, and then it will be quieting down. The third is that there's a persistent crisis that comes up and down. This basically demonstrates, that research models are guiding policy interventions. Depending on which one you believe in, each of these will dictate, what kind of policies a government will have, right? And these policies really dictate our day-to-day lives. Now, so I'm not an expert, but based on a very quick deep dive, so general epidemic modeling approaches comprise two main folds. So one is the more traditional SIR model, and there are a few variations of this. So it's acceptable, exposed, infectious, and recovery. And so models created around each of these categories of persons within communities. Then there are increasingly now also agent-based models, which simulate dynamic human interactions computationally. Again, these days we have more powerful computers with AI that can actually run some of these models more. But there have been great debates about COVID-19 epidemic models as well. So Imperial College of London published their model and gave testimony. And when they subsequently revised it, there was a huge outcry regarding them, correcting it. Again, their model was quite pessimistic, and so therefore led to a lot of decisions being made by various governments. But the press had been quite negative in relation to some of those changes. Similarly, IHME at the University of Washington had created a model based on graphing the number of deaths of detected cities abroad and then fitting into US cities. And there was a lot of criticism around that as well, because the cities are not identical and there are various differences between cities abroad and the US ones as well. So this really highlighted some aspects about modeling that is unfortunately not often focused on, and particularly important in the area of AI, when AI are really, a lot of them are based on models and algorithms. So a famous quote given by George Box is that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So models, whether statistical or machine learning, have different pros and cons, but models really need data, so garbage in, garbage out, and there's so many different points, and in this example of the virus biology, that we don't know, and therefore impacts different models. There are lots of assumptions that need to be made in relation to models, and humans react differently to those models, right? So in Asia, masks were more common for a long time before it became more accepted as an appropriate exercise in the West. Similarly, geographies are different, so policies around cities and suburbs are different. socioeconomic communities, and dormitories all create different dynamics and human behavioral patterns. There are different impacts of policy interventions. So understanding the biology and then the human nature, and then when you introduce a policy intervention and a mitigation, how does that impact everything else? And then how do you explain or interpret those models, especially to the press or to a layperson to understand and feel in relation to those decisions? So one of the models being used in AI governance is a rather unfortunate acronym called FAT, Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency. And kind of using that model and superimposing it into what's been used for COVID-19 modeling. Under fairness, COVID-19 modeling and reflections upon that show that humans are different and react differently for lots of different reasons. So you can't use one model for one thing and necessarily transfer to others. There needs to be tweaks, right? And there's a digital divide issue. In some countries, you might have lots of access to later model smartphones and others not. So you have to address your interventions differently. For accountability, you've got a lot of the researchers for the models are academics, practitioners, and clinicians, but they're not actually implementing the policies. And that's similar with the AI space. Those that are creating the algorithms are not necessarily creating the products that are going out there. And it's an observation was that there's been quite a bit of skepticism about the COVID-19 models. And it kind of reminded me of some of the skepticism of the climate change risk modeling as well. I mean, it's very difficult. Models are difficult, right? But really important as well. Last but not least, transparency. So being able to explain, interpret the models, both for something like epidemics, but as well as for AI, is so important. And it just reflected the lack of literacy amongst policymakers and media in terms of the use and the reporting of these models. Now, AI modeling is really important. So while it may not, COVID-19 has caused us to focus on it because it's talking about life and death, but AI modeling can impact lives in really significant ways as well. So that includes, prison sentencing, right? Police arrests, whether you get a loan and at what rate, and what insurance rates you pay. So all of these are impacted by AI modeling as we know it today. So next, in relation to universal basic income, I like to start with a quote by Hong Kong U's own Gabriel Leong, who says, "What we right now face is a battle between what we do for public health and what we need to do for the economy and for the social and the economic emotional well-being." So because of what has happened to the economy, there have been stimulus plans that have been pushed out, where cash payments are made to citizens around the world for partially or not even working. And the US amount that was quoted was $6 trillion overall, and that's a quarter of the US GDP. Now, universal basic income is a concept that arose around the rise of automation and machines and AI. And there's more machines and AI. What will humans do, and therefore shouldn't they be paid something for basic cost of living? And with the creation of COVID-19, you've had if there are no person-to-person interactions, we're now looking at person-to-machine. So suddenly this fringe idea that was popularized by US Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang has now become more mainstream. So a quote that's been provided by Matt Zolinsky of the University of San Diego is that COVID-19 is changing everything. So previously, one of the criticisms of UBI was that it costs a lot. It rewards lazy people and the like. Now it's not really one of the discussion points, right? Because it's just being used to keep families afloat, businesses afloat, and an economy from collapsing. So so now it's being actively considered by some jurisdictions, right? So the First Minister of Scotland has indicated that she believes that UBI is an idea that has come, and the relevant minister in Spain has indicated that it's something that UBI is something they want to do as soon as possible. But there are important questions that still remain regarding, how it's going to be funded. So currently, UBI only exists in oil-rich jurisdictions like Alaska and Iran. So how, if this amount needs to be paid because all these old jobs can no longer be done in the way that it used to be, how's that going to be funded? So I thought I'd end with 10 themes that I kind of pulled out regarding Lawtech, Regtech, and AI in the post-COVID-19 world from my research to date, and I'd love to get your feedback and questions afterwards. So the first theme is that digital working and living is the new normal, especially if you believe that the waves are going to come, right? Secondly, evolving business models are really key to Lawtech and Regtech adoption. So if the clients themselves relying on cash flow and they can't pay for the investment into the technology, then that's not going to work. So how are the new business models going to work in law and in regulation? Third, there's a rise in terms of privacy by design. I think that's a phrase and an approach that you will hear a lot. Google and Apple were at pains to develop their system based on privacy by design, as is MIT and a lot of the other countries around the world. Fourth, if you're a state and you are considering tech solutions, there are various options that at your disposal, but two of the main axes are firstly, do you centralize everything or you make it decentralized? And secondly, do you keep it voluntary or do you make it mandatory? And these will be interesting to explore how different states approach this. Fifth, surveillance will increase in its various forms, and whether through different types of contact tracing or other means. So, and these will create different challenges for privacy. Six, there will be a significant role of big tech as facilitators and gatekeepers of these platforms going forward. In China, it was Alibaba and Tencent that allowed for their health code apps to go forward. And similarly, here you look at Apple and Google, two of the biggest competitors, fiercest competitors coming together. So where does that leave states, and how do states interact with them? Seventh, there'll be competition over tech standards and the impact of interoperability. So the last thing you want is, it's kind of like this shows my age, the Sony, Betamax, and VHS kind of debates. If you have two systems, how do you get them to talk to one another, especially in the need where you need the systems to be able to communicate? Eighth, there really is a need for improved and broader literacy of modeling and data analytics. Without better understanding how these work, how can we properly assess the different kind of approaches that are impacting all our lives? 9, there'll be greater consideration of UBI and labor impacts going forward, as well as how potentially those can or should be funded, unless we're going through a season of increased debt and across the world. And last but not least, the importance of trust for a multilateral, open and safe world. Trust in the government, trust in big tech, trust in other countries that are doing things and keeping their citizens safe, because once the planes start going, and on a personal note, I'd love for the planes to start going again between Perth and Hong Kong so I can head back home. But that can only happen if both sides are comfortable with the respective measures that each has taken, from the regulatory side and from the surveillance and the privacy side. So with that, I wanted to close up. Here are my brief contact details. But let me now stop sharing my screen, and let me go to Q&A to see what questions I have. And I have a couple, so if you still have some more questions, please feel free to send them through. Let's see. First, I have a compliment. Thank you very much. And the question is, do you think Hong Kong government will act fast to reform its system with technology during and after the virus? Okay, so that's a multifaceted question. So I might restrict my answer to that to the two areas that I focused on, which is Lawtech and Regtech. So on the Lawtech side, as you've seen, the Hong Kong government actually has introduced quite a few interesting measures to address the growth of that space and addressing contact access to justice. I mean, if you have a dispute, if you have something that is pressing and you need it resolved and you need to access the courts, or if you need to have some other way to resolve it through online dispute resolution and alternative dispute resolution, that is coming into place. So that's a great thing. Similarly, helping to get the buy side, if you like, on Lawtech, in terms of the law, the smaller firms to actually have money to invest in the technology, that's a good thing. The courts engaging in more online dispute resolution and remote resolution, I think that's a great thing. So there's so many different ways that these are all great things. Can more be done? And sorry, then on the Regtech side, the HKMA has been a great proponent of pushing on the Regtech space. In fact, and they will be engaging in a campaign to raise awareness and engage of Regtech, because it is a multi-stakeholder engagement. But there are, so those were happening before COVID and will continue to happen as well. So from that point of view, though, that's been great. Can more be done? Certainly more can be done in lots of different ways. I think digital transformation is about mindset. So hopefully, but one of the things, as I observed earlier on, is that during time of pandemic, people react differently. Some people are scared and fearful, and they're transfixed, they can't move. Others are opportunistic and they change and they adapt well. And if you work in a broad environment, how do you navigate that to get the whole organization and others to act, especially when they can't actually sit together, shall we say? And that is an issue. But I think if more can be done on the mindset side and the trust, I think trust is important to allow citizens to be willing and able to share more data that is required in relation to some of these solutions. And trust is something that needs to be developed more and greater as hopefully people reach across more in Hong Kong. Thanks for the question. So the next question is, what does cleared mean? I know maybe there was a typo there. And then models and the concepts of bias, validation, and uncertainty. Yes, so I didn't want to go into all the details of, I could spend the whole session just on models. But the point, the question was in relation to my not indicating three aspects of missing three key aspects of modeling, which is bias, validation, and uncertainty. The point about my point about raising the modeling is this: models exist whether you like it or not. It's just how much you know about it, how much you're willing to engage in it, and whether you understand it enough to accept it for what it is good for, but also then be able to criticize some of its weaknesses, right? And it is not a panacea by any means, and in fact has its limitations. But the reality is that for us to act as a society, we do need models. But I wanted to raise awareness, especially in terms of my interest on AI governance. How do we ensure that we as a society and as individuals better understand models as it impacts more broader aspects of our lives through AI and the like. And the COVID-19 situation really allowed us to focus in on something that a lot of people are now looking at or citing in the press and whatnot, but are they fully understanding it? And I think you raise a good point about, is it properly, understand, right? Properly understood, and we need more public engagement and maybe even better communicators from those in that circle. In the US, there's quite a movement now amongst the AI governance folk who are trying to get more engaged in the communication side so that we can have more feedback of humans in the loop and understanding the processes. Then there was a point about, and I had a few people raise their hands. So if you're raising your hand, just send the question through so that I can look at these. There's a question about what areas of Lawtech and Regtech reformation in Hong Kong do you think is the top priority? So I think in terms of Lawtech, I think there just needs to be greater awareness and dare I say it, people rolling up their sleeves to actually engage in it. Right now, it seems a little bit too, that a lot of us who are lawyers have used Lawtech for ages, LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters, they're Lawtech, right? But there's so many different aspects of Lawtech now that can both improve efficiencies, improve the way the future of the delivery of law could be engaged in, and also in terms of access to justice. So a couple of quick examples. So one is, I'm a big proponent of encouraging the rolling up of sleeves and creating kind of prototypes. And I've had good track records. So most of teams that I've worked with that have gone on to pitch their solutions to international audiences and have won. So most recently, a team from my class last semester was meant to go to Washington, D.C., but because of COVID, could not go there, presented online, and for something called the Untitled Law Challenge, Law Invitational, which was open for the first time across the world, and they won. They created an AI-powered data bank, which allowed injured employees to get the compensation they deserve. So that's fantastic. And in fact, we I don't know whether I should say this, but we made a submission. So hopefully next semester I will be, or the semester after, I'll actually be teaching classes on Lawtech and Regtech prototyping. So stay tuned for that. On the Regtech space, I think we're coming across really nicely in terms of the regulators are very, very engaged, but it really needs more case studies from the financial institutions and the fintechs themselves to come together to raise the bar. And some of us have been working on that quite a bit. I organized at Hong Kong U last year something called the World Regtech Summit, and we had 16 Regtechs pitch in front of regulators, in front of market participants and the like, and we want to do more of that to raise the bar. Now, I think I might have time for, oh, I'm sorry, maybe I don't have time for any more questions because I'm at 1:29 according to this. So I'm sorry I couldn't answer all your questions. If you wanted to get in touch with me to follow up on some of the points, please feel free to do so. What I will do is I will share my screen again, which will have my contact details down here. I very much enjoyed speaking to you. I hope you found it a fruitful time to spend over your lunch break. And I want to continue the discourse in relation to this space. This is by no means the end of this discourse and discussion, and we want to engage more of the industry so that we can interact more in the coming months and years. Without further ado, thank you very much for your time, and perhaps we'll see each other at the next webinar presented by at Hong Kong U in relation to COVID-19 and legal challenges. Thank you, and be safe and have a great afternoon.